Howdy! Papyrus does not claim to own anything in this video, and we encourage you to check out the original works. Links are in the description. Content warnings, if any, are also in the description.
Wowie! I was overjoyed. Undyne had actually captured that rascally little child, and part of Metaton's body. We were really making progress. Finding my partner in the city wasn't very difficult. I simply followed the chaos, destruction, and the howling laughter is all. Undyne must have really given the small human a run for their money. They were completely tuckered out, damp and smelly. Their newsboy hat was singed from magical spear burns, same with their striped shirt as well. Luckily, it didn't appear that Undyne ever hurt the little fella. They just hung there in her claw like a tired little puppy. Undyne kept staring at the child, like it was the most curious thing for some reason. I know the child was caught with part of Metaton's body, but it wasn't that mysterious. "Human!" I called out in my most heroic and manly of voices. "What do you know about Metaton's body?" No reply. No answer. Not even a twitch of recognition. The human just hung there still. Maybe they didn't hear me is all? I tried asking the same question again, this time shouting my loudest of shouts. As a professional shouter, I don't think anyone could match with. Undyne nearly dropped the human in an attempt to cover her fishy fin-like ears. She grimaced at the power of my shouting. "Paps, please," she groaned. Well, the human certainly wasn't taking any questions right now. Maybe they were too tired, or maybe just refused to talk. I turned to my partner, who already appeared lost in thought again. I had never seen her daydream so much in my life. "What about the blood on the boot?" I asked her. Her eye blinked and Undyne returned to me. Shuffling through some damp and soggy aces, she pulled out the shiny metal boot. "Rain washed it off," she said curtly, allowing me to eye it over. Darn! I suppose it didn't much matter, since Undyne and I both saw the blood and didn't exactly have any kind of machine to analyze it anyway. But why would there be blood on it in the first place? Monsters don't bleed, only humans do. Was it this child's blood? No, there was no sign of cuts or bruises on them, even after the fight. I scratched my skull. We caught the human and even got part of the body. Yet this seemed to only bring more questions. But I would not fret. Mysteries are like puzzles, and every puzzle has an answer. Sometimes you just have to stare long enough at them to figure it out. Speaking of staring, Undyne had gone back to it and was looking straight through me. At first, my reaction was to think it rude. I'm not a ghost, I'm a skeleton. I turned around instead to see what had gotten her so interested. Gasp! Twist! Wowie! Asgore's shop and home! How did we end up here? Did the frisky little human lead us here, or was it merely a coincidence? Either way, we needed to speak to Asgore, as he was now clearly our prime suspect, growing more and more suspicious as time went on. "I'll take the human as evidence if you don't mind," I said, grabbing for the child. Undyne shrugged, not minding at all. Gently and tenderly, I placed the small human in one of my coat's larger front pockets. A few aces overflowed out onto the alley floor as the child's head poked out of the pocket. The child didn't struggle in the least, I'm sure out of politeness. Everything neatly tucked away, I told Undyne where we were headed next. She nodded, agreeing with me. I looked both ways before crossing the street to Asgore's flower shop. and once the coast was clear, I strolled at an even and lawful pace. Undine, of course, just waltzed through without even checking. I'd need to have another talk with her about the safety rules of the road later. The same bells as before jingled and chimed as sweetly as the flower scents in the shop. Once again we were accosted by all the colors and smells, but after the third time this night I wouldn't let myself get so distracted. I sauntered forward to the counter, expecting to see the bunny and dragon like last time, but twistingly enough, I found Toriel. Wowie! What was she doing here? Last I remember, she had simply helped me get up and cleaned me off a bit before I went chasing after Undine. Also, when did she have time to grow her horns out so much and change out of her dress? For some odd reason, Toriel was wearing a pinstriped suit, like the last two employees here. At the chime of the bell, Toriel turned around and greeted me with a warm and gracious smile.
Howdy. What can I do for you?
She stopped mid-sentence once her large, manly eyes noticed the child in my pocket and the Undine at my side. The smile faltered for a moment, but she resumed it quickly enough. "Hello again, Miss Toriel," I greeted happily, wondering where her mischievous flowery son must be. "Funny running into you, but we're still looking for Asgore." At the mention of her name, Toriel flushed slightly for some reason, the fur in her cheeks turning a light red. The child, the Undine, and the name all seemed to make her quite confused for some reason. She coughed and cleared her deep voice. Maybe she had gotten a cold while I was away.
Toriel's my wife. I'm Asgore.
The elbow I had placed on the counter slipped out from underneath me, and I crashed my skull into the counter as I heard the surprising twist. Asgore was a clone of Toriel? I mean, I suppose this Toriel was much bigger and heftier, but they looked so similar. Both white-furred goat monsters. How would anyone tell the difference? Asgore? Made a small shocked noise, asking me if I was all right after my brush with twists. I assured her, him, not to worry. Boy, this was going to be hard to get used to. Asgore smiled, his cheery gaze looking past me now and towards my partner.
Undine?
He absent-mindedly clasped his paws together. There was a strange moment of silence. Undine didn't hoot or holler, but she didn't growl either. She stared at the large goat clone for a moment, her eyes roving over his body as if to make sure this was indeed the real thing. Understandably so. I still wasn't convinced this wasn't just Toriel.
"Hey, Asgore,"
Undine finally replied, almost sheepishly. She blinked, a big fanged grin spread across her face.
"It's been a long time, you big furball."
Undine smiled at Asgore, giving him her best, firm handshake. Most people would grimace at the pressure, but Asgore kept his warm smile the entire time. I thought it was quite strange to see her so happy like this, but even stranger still, there was a faint sense of unease, as if Undine was uncomfortable around him. How could this be? Undine never felt uneasy around anyone. Handshake finally finished, she noticed me staring at that fishy face of hers.
"What are you looking at?"
She growled, glaring spears at me. I must have been making my thought-provoking grizzled detective face at her without knowing it. I decided to scribble in my notebook instead of angering her. While I knew we had a case to continue, I didn't wish to pry between two old friends. I let them catch up first.
You must visit more often, Undine.
Asgore smiled, his eyes lighting up like diamonds. I noticed bags under them, though, as if he were tired and haggard, as if they used to shine brighter in a long time past.
I've learned to make some wonderful teas that I'm certain you'll love.
For a brief moment, Undine's eye also shone bright. A happiness in her I've almost never witnessed myself. But for some reason or another, she hid that feeling away.
"I'm sure I would,"
she agreed, leaving it at that. It wasn't like Undine to be fake around anyone, but part of me wasn't even sure if she was being fake at all. Another uncomfortable silence. Toriel's clone looked at his enormous paws, noticed he had held them together much too tightly, and loosened their grip. He finally pried his eyes away from Undine and gazed at me with that warm, fuzzy smile of his. I felt like I was being wrapped in a woolly blanket. His gaze found its way to my pocket, to the child. I couldn't read his expression.
Ah, forgive me for my rudeness. I haven't even asked your name.
He bowed his head in apology. I nodded and head and pointed a bony thumb back to myself. I am the great detective Papyrus. He was shocked at my greatness, like most are. I'd use this against him and gauge his reaction to my next question. My partner and I are on the case looking for a stolen body owned by our client, Metaton himself. No look of guilt, unfortunately, just confusion. He stared at me, then at Undine, then back to me. He must not have known Undine became a detective.
Ah, yes. Mr. Metaton is a delightful fellow, if not a little enthusiastic. But I'm afraid I don't know anything about a stolen body,
He replied, shaking his head sadly. Now, this part of the job I never particularly liked. I think everyone has good inside them, and I admit it is hard for me to imagine anyone doing any wrongdoing, especially this cuddly goat clone. But I must find the truth. I must help those in need. I pointed an accusing bony finger at Asgore, something I've learned is an invaluable part of solving mysteries. A likely story! I shouted in a way that showed I actually did not think it was a likely story at all. But we know Metaton is in debt to you! I continued pointing at him. Asgore squirmed under my perilous point, looking left and right, and then to Undine. She just shrugged. He coughed.
Well, yes. Mr. Metaton does owe me money, but I assure you, I am in no hurry to reclaim that money. I trust Mr. Metaton, and I believe he will pay me back on his own time.
He was gaining confidence from each word. I was losing this detective battle. No! I still had aces. Aces everywhere. I pulled out my ace, aces falling and scattering across the tile. Before Asgore's very eyes, I held out the child dramatically. The human, luckily, was still very tired and didn't struggle. Nice try! But if that were true... I motioned behind myself at Undine. She sighed and placed the battered boot in my bony hand. Just why was this human snooping around your hideout with part of Metaton's body? I nearly shoved the child and boot into Asgore's muzzle. Yes, the tempo was rising. I held the upper hand in this battle of wills now. The goat clone began to sweat, clearly uncomfortable with the evidence against him. He took a few steps back, holding up his large fuzzy paws almost defensively.
I honestly have no idea.
He said, rather flustered-like, I might add. His back was against a shelf. Pots filled with flowers clattered gently, startling him.
I actually wanted to ask you,
Asgore fussed with the plants quickly, making sure none were harmed.
why do you have Frisk in your pocket?
I felt like I had been dumped onto a twister. Asgore knew the human's name? Surely more proof of his guilt. This human is evidence against your crime, Asgore! I wouldn't back down. Before Asgore could confess, there was a loud thump that reverberated against one of the walls of the shop. More than the evidence I had shown him, Asgore feared that noise most of all for some odd reason. His body shook as if a bolt of lightning had struck him. He would no longer make eye contact with me, Undine, or Frisk now.
I'm terribly sorry.
He said, his voice becoming somber, sad.
This must be a misunderstanding. I assure you. But it will have to be sorted out later.
Those eyes that had shone were now dull. His white fur lost its shimmer. He looked almost weak.
Have a look around, if you must, but please respect my privacy. I must be going now.
Before I could pin the crime on him, Asgore had slipped away through a large doorway into his home. He didn't even stop to say goodbye to Undine. More on that, Undine didn't chase after him. What was going on here? Pardon my harsh language, but I was getting sick and tired of being twisted and turned. In a brief moment of frustration, I regrettably vented it out on my partner, knowing full well she knew more than me at this point. Did you know this little Frisk as well, Undine? I said, holding the human child up to her. She didn't get angry with me, at least. I think she actually understood my frustration. She shook her head.
No, honestly, I had no idea who that little punk was, and I still don't.
My anger subsided and I felt hollow inside, mostly due to the fact I'm just bones. I placed Frisk back into my evidence pocket. Aw, geez, I'm sorry I sassed at you, Undine. I offered her the boot again for her to hold, to show I still trusted her. She smiled, placing the boot away.
Perhaps, don't worry about it. You could never hurt me anyway.
She cackled. Rude? Her expression turned more serious, however.
But we should take this chance to look around.
An excellent proposal, I agreed. While I may have gotten nothing out of interrogating Asgore, surely his home held some sort of valuable clues. First things first, the shop front. Nothing of note appeared to have changed since our last visit. Nothing of consequence was visible. The 2 employees from before were nowhere to be found, most likely finished for the night. From the lack of noise and general stillness, I gathered Asgore was the only one left working tonight, and probably close to closing shop. The door to his home was slightly ajar, tempting me. Was it right to go into his home while he was away? Well, Asgore didn't leave the shop, so he was most likely somewhere inside still, right? The building was of a decent size, though, and he could have left from the back. My moral compass wasn't giving me clear directions this time around. Luckily, Undine didn't think too hard about this one. She hopped over the counter as if she owned the place and strolled through the door, beckoning me to follow. Well, my partner had a strong sense of justice. If she felt this was fine, then it must be fine. I followed her. The inside of Asgore's home was quite cozy, much like his shop front. Considering this was the leader of a supposedly sketchy group of monsters, his home was not very decadent. The inside was spacious, of course, considering his enormous size. A fire crackled quietly in a fireplace across from a warm armchair. The fire was unattended, but seemed perfectly in control. No sparks dared to escape their confines. I figured this was as good a time as any to ask about Asgore as we searched. Undine, I know this is a sore subject for you, but what is your relationship with Asgore? I asked, lifting a cushion from Asgore's armchair and inspecting it for clues. Nothing. Wait, maybe? No, just a cushion. Undine was holding a framed picture in her sharp claws, having picked it up from a small table near the chair. The picture showed 3 goat clones smiling happily together.
You remember how I said I worked for those 2 guys when we first visited here?
She said almost absent-mindedly, staring at the photo for a moment before placing it back down. I nodded to her, continuing my inspection of the chair. It wouldn't hide any clues from me. Kneeling down before a small bookcase, flipping through a few flower information books, Undine continued.
I'm sure that you guessed it by now, but I used to work for the family.
I did. Well, mostly. I pretty much knew that.
Asgore was my boss, obviously. I used to be a little punk like that kid there.
She motioned a claw at my Frisk evidence.
He kept me in line, for the most part.
Undine had finished looking through the bookcase, noting it was almost only filled with books related to flowers and other plant life. After I was sure this chair had nothing to hide from me, we made our way down a hallway together.
Charity work is great and all,
Undine sighed.
but that's boring. It's not my thing. You know me. I need action.
She punched a fist in the air, startling me ever so slightly. She laughed at the sound of my bones rattling and patted me on the back. I only flinched to make her feel better.
Luckily, Asgore helped me with that. Helping people isn't all building houses and throwing money at them, you know.
She sounded almost nostalgic now. Undine led us to a greenhouse. It appeared Asgore had it installed directly next to his home, and considering all the rain we get, that was probably a good idea. Droplets splashed gently against the glass roof, sliding down the glass walls eagerly. The air was humid here.
I mean, of course, I helped build homes, too.
Undine added.
But sometimes monsters are in need of protection. Sometimes they need someone to fight for them.
Flowers of all sorts were budding and blooming here. Many different sets of lights and sprinklers had been set up to accommodate each and every fussy flower. Bags of fertilizer and soil sat neatly inside cabinets, and all sorts of other gardening tools that I don't particularly know the use of. I was inspecting those and listening to Undine at the same time.
Humans aren't always kind, Papyrus.
Undine sighed, staring at a rather vibrant purple flower.
Asgore taught me to fight.
She paused and laughed quietly to herself.
Well, that's not true. I knew how to fight already. He just made me even better at it.
Some golden flowers shone beautifully across the way. Undine seemed curious and very eager to examine them. They were nearly exploding out of their pots, there were so many growing.
Thing I liked about Asgore,
Undine went on, placing a hand on the golden petals as if she were petting them.
we never really talked much. I think he knew I don't like that kind of stuff.
Those flowers were familiar.
We understood each other, without really needing to say it.
Undine's eye returned from Nostalgia Land, and her hand went from the flower petals down to the dirt beneath them. I couldn't see beneath the petals. It was absolutely filled to the brim with those golden flowers. For a brief moment her eye widened and she felt around. I didn't want to interrupt, as this was probably the most Undine had ever opened up to me since ever, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Did you find something, Undine?" I asked, hopeful. My fishy partner shrugged.
Nah, nothing here,
she replied, bringing a clenched claw out from the bed of golden flowers. She placed her hands in her pockets casually.
You find anything?
To be honest, I wasn't quite sure what I was even looking for. There was no sign of Metaton's body anywhere here, though. That I was sure of. "Nothing yet," I said cunningly. Our investigation took us back to the hallway. "So, why did you leave the family, then?" I asked as we walked. Undine looked puzzled at that question. She stared at our slow strolling feet, frowning.
Honestly, Paps? I don't know. Something changed. Asgore changed.
She chuckled.
Of course, I didn't ask him why or tell him any of this.
Yep, that sounds like Undine, all right.
Maybe I changed? I don't know.
She shook her head as if there was something she wanted to say but couldn't bring herself to do it.
Either way, it was around that time you and I met. I'm much happier going on adventures and solving mysteries with you.
Goodness me! My bony cheeks became red just thinking about it. I couldn't help but grin, and it felt as if my grin could rival even my brother's. How sweet of her to say! For once, I found myself speechless. Fangs played out in a smile of her own. She scratched the back of her head, obviously embarrassed about revealing so much.
Last stupid mushy-gushy thing, I swear!
She yelled.
You don't need to worry about me up and abandoning you, Paps.
She growled.
And that's all I'm saying about that.
Aww. Not that I would have worried about that for a second, but it was still so nice to hear. This is why Undine was my partner and my best friend. You couldn't escape from me if you tried anyway. I'd just track you down. I gave her a great big tight hug, and to my happy surprise I found Undine only struggled and cursed just a little bit this time.
All right. Enough of this lame nerd talk.
Undine slipped out of my grasp and resumed her distance away from me.
We've got work to do.
She was right. Although, after hearing her past with Asgore and investigating his home, I was starting to wonder if he was actually a suspect after all. Well, that was until we came to the end of this particular hallway. A door. Just a regular door. Nothing special. It was tucked away at the end of the hallway, incredibly easy to overlook. It appeared no different than any other door in the home, but something about it frightened me. I was brave enough to admit that I was a little scared. I looked over at Undine. I could tell she felt the same way. She hesitated before this particular door as well. Not for long, however, before she began tugging at the doorknob. It was locked tight. Normally, locked doors meant nothing to my fishy partner, but this time, she didn't feel too inclined to knock it down. Maybe it was due to her respect for Asgore? Maybe she wanted to respect the law? Maybe she was also afraid. No, that was wrong. Undine would never fear anything. Maybe we shouldn't go in there, I asked. There was no light on underneath the door. It was dark. Asgore probably keeps it locked for a reason. Undine looked at me and nodded.
Exactly.
I couldn't take my eye sockets off of the door. It was clearly suspicious, clearly strange, but I don't think I wanted to go in there. Before I could understand what happened, the door was open. How? What happened? Undine wasn't surprised. I didn't like this. I stared inside at the dark. I couldn't see anything inside. It was dark. So dark. I've never seen a darkness like this, so black. So empty. For some reason I thought of Sans, but I don't know why. I had to go forward, though. I had to investigate. But my bones wouldn't move. They were rattling on their own, too. Was I shaking? I felt like I was getting sucked in, almost like losing my essence, myself. Undine walked in slowly. A few steps in, and I almost couldn't see her already. Before I could muster up the courage to follow, the door slammed shut. I didn't see how. I was too afraid. I was very scared now. I pounded my bony fists against the door after her. The door wouldn't open. Why was it locked again? Undine, what's going on in there? The door is locked. Are you all right? There was a pause behind the door.
I'm fine, Papyrus. Door must have gotten stuck. I'll investigate on my own and find a way out.
She didn't sound afraid. I wish I could have been braver for her. Are you sure? There must be a key somewhere.
Yeah, there probably is one out there somewhere. Maybe get searching for one,
she responded. I went over my options for a moment. I didn't want anything bad to happen to Undine. Should I just leave her there in that horrible darkness? But something told me she wanted me to leave. Sure, I'll go look for it. I paused. But if anything goes wrong, just yell, okay?
Everything's just fine.
She assured me.
But get looking for that key for me, alright?
I didn't like this at all. But I had to trust her. After everything she told me, after she finally opened up to me. She trusted me, and I needed to prove that I trusted her. Okay, I'll go, but I won't be far. I found my way back to the living room. I was a bit more frantic in my search now, admittedly. I tossed the cushion over, threw a few books out of the bookcase, and checked under every rug. Nothing still. I sighed. Now wasn't the time to be overcome with worry, though. I had to believe in Undine, believe everything would be okay. I'd be ready to help if I even heard the slightest noise. There wasn't a point in searching anymore. Everything that could have been searched had been searched. I would just have to wait for Undine to find a way out. I fixed up the mess I'd made and sat in Asgore's enormous warm chair. My worries were slipping away. I just needed to be patient. This was a good time to stop and think. Who stole Metaton's body? Alphys? She worked under Metaton. She was closest to him. She made the body. If anyone knew how to get it, it was her. She clearly was not very happy working for that marvelous metal machine, but would she sabotage him? It was possible. Undine liked Metaton even less. She could have even helped motivate Alphys to do so. No, not Undine. Not right now. I shouldn't think terribly toward her, especially now. What about the Timmies? They were strange, funny monsters, sure, but they also worked for Metaton, and he also treated them rather poorly. They certainly have the motivation and the means, but did they possess the intellect to do that? It was hard to say. Then there was Sans. His shortcuts were always a neat trick, and I suppose if he knew where the body was, he could theoretically steal it. But why would he? He has nothing against Metaton, and also he's my brother, and also he was just too lazy. I scratched my skull with the eraser tip of my pencil as I stared at the notes. I suppose there's Toriel and Flowey as well, but they don't have the motivation or the means. As far as I can tell, they know nothing about Metaton. And last, of course, Asgore. As I already told him, Metaton owed him money. He has motivation to do so, and with all the monsters and power at his disposal, he certainly has the means. Everything certainly pointed to Asgore, yet we found almost no evidence at his home, and not even a hint of guilt. Was he just faking it? I don't think so, with the way Undine speaks about him. It was all very strange. That's when I felt something strange against my leg bone. A clue? A twist? I really hope it wasn't something spooky. Frisk was wiggling around in my pocket. The human! I almost completely forgot. Actually, I did forget. The human was our biggest and most important clue yet. But how did they fit in? Asgore certainly knew about Frisk, but if he was truly a criminal mastermind, he would never name them like that in front of us and give himself away. Who else knew Frisk? The human clearly wasn't doing this alone. Suddenly the wiggling became stronger and stronger. Frisk was determined to wiggle? Wait a... An explosion of aces rained down over the living room, and the force pushed me back into the chair, leaving me stunned. The human had leapt out of my pocket! My evidence! The little rascal sprinted out, and I stumbled out of the chair, trying my darndest to follow. Zooming through the room like a hyperactive cat, Frisk escaped through the door to the shop. I ran after, of course, but I just couldn't keep up. Before I had even reached the shop part again, I heard the little bells chiming and jingling. Frisk had rushed out the door and into the dark, rainy city. Dang it! I couldn't chase right now. I couldn't leave Undine. Our biggest evidence gone. I sighed. At least we still had the boot. Things weren't looking up right now for the great detective Papyrus, that's for sure. But I wouldn't let it get to me. I decided it was a good time to check up on that door, but while I went, there was one last thing to think about. That boot. How Frisk had it in the first place is a mystery, but stranger still was the blood. From everything we had seen, this seems to be a monster-related crime. No human should have blood on it. But what could that mean? Was it possible it wasn't blood at all? Maybe Undyne and I both just saw wrong. Maybe there was no red substance on it in the first place. Oh! The door was open now. Undyne was back, safe! I could barely contain myself as I sprinted toward her. Undyne! Are you all right? What happened? I could barely contain my questions. Undyne looked tired, though, almost exhausted even. Part of her coat was slightly singed for some odd reason, and her hair was just a bit more disheveled than usual. She was wincing slightly, but it appeared only because her eye was adjusting to the light now. She smiled through it all.
I told you I'd be fine, Paps.
The fishwoman craned her neck back and stretched her arms, shaking her head as if shaking the darkness itself off her body. She was quick to close the door.
Nothing much happened,
She continued.
but I can tell you one important thing I learned.
If I had lungs, I'd be holding my breath right now. Undyne needed to compose herself before speaking the last and final clue to our Metaton mystery.
Asgore didn't steal Metaton's body.